On a 103-degree fall summer morning, I came home one day early and found my 7-month-old granddaughter barely breathing on the kitchen floor. My daughter-in-law looked at me with trembling eyes and whispered, "He turned off the AC days ago." He said, "The baby will be fine. I'm not wasting money cooling the whole house." I walked to the master bedroom and found my son relaxing in icy air with another woman. I didn't yell. I didn't touch him. 3 days later, he lost his house, his money, and everything he thought he owned. Welcome back to Wise Revenge, where we bring you true, inspired stories of family justice. Before we begin, a quick note. This story is based on real events, but names, locations, and certain details have been changed to protect the people involved. If stories like this speak to you, stay to the end and don't forget to subscribe. At 72, I had spent 30 years cooling half of Houston's industrial sector. But I never imagined my 7-month-old granddaughter would be the one burning alive inside a house I paid for. The teddy bear from O'Hare sat on the passenger seat as I drove I-10 west into Houston that Monday morning in early July. 3 weeks in Chicago, closing the Midwest expansion deal, the longest I'd been away from home since Rebecca died 2 years ago. The dashboard thermometer climbed as I crossed into Harris County, outside temp 103 degrees, heat index 112. Standard Houston summer. Nothing my systems couldn't handle. I'd built Ashford Climate Systems from a garage operation in 1993 to the second-largest commercial HVAC contractor in Texas. 30 years of installing compressors and ductwork in warehouses, hospitals, office towers. 30 years of making unbearable heat bearable. The work had made me wealthy enough to retire 5 years ago, but I still consulted on major projects, hence Chicago, hence 3 weeks away from Valentina and Rosie. Valentina had sent only 2 text messages in those 3 weeks. Short ones. "Rosie's fine. Talk soon." No photos. For the first 2 months after Rosie was born, Valentina sent pictures daily: Rosie sleeping, Rosie trying solid food, Rosie's first smile. Then the photos stopped around mid-June. I told myself she was just busy. New mothers get overwhelmed. I didn't push. I should have asked why she stopped sending pictures. The Memorial Drive estate looked perfect from the street-manicured St. Augustine grass oak trees I'd planted when Darren was 6, the circular driveway where my son had learned to ride a bike. I'd bought this house in 1997 when the company took off, transferred the deed to Darren and Valentina as a wedding gift 3 years ago. A place to raise a family. A place to build something. I pulled in at 10:15 one day earlier than my scheduled return. Surprise grandpa visit. I grabbed the teddy bear and my overnight bag. The front door was unlocked. Odd. Valentina was meticulous about security, always locked. The deadbolt always set the alarm. I pushed the door open and stepped into the entryway. The heat hit me like opening an oven door. No hum from the central AC compressor. No cool air flowing from the vents I'd personally spec'd and installed 7 years ago. Just thick, suffocating stillness that smelled faintly of sweat and something sour I couldn't place. I dropped my bag and walked to the hallway thermostat. 98 degrees, inside the house. In 30 years of building systems to cool this city, when did I stop checking on the people inside them? Valentina. My voice echoed through the silent house. Rosie. No answer. No sound at all except my own breathing and the distant hum of a neighbor's AC unit through the walls. A sound so familiar, it usually disappeared into background noise, but in this silent heat, it felt like mockery. I moved through the living room toward the kitchen. Curtains drawn, lights off, every window sealed tight. The air tasted thick and dead. Then I saw them. Valentina sat on the kitchen tile floor with her back against the lower cabinet's legs, stretched out on the only cool surface left in the house. She was 30 years old, barely 3 years into her marriage, and she looked like she'd aged a decade. Sunken eyes, greasy hair pulled back, tank top soaked with sweat. In her arms, wearing only a diaper, was Rosie. Valentina looked up when I entered. Her expression wasn't relief or surprise, it was something worse. Resignation. The hollow gaze of someone who'd stopped expecting rescue. "Arthur," she whispered. "She won't stop crying. She's been like this since yesterday." Arthur. Valentina never used my first name, always called me Lawrence or Mr. Ashford, even after I told her a dozen times to drop the formality. But now, sitting on that floor, holding my granddaughter in 98-degree heat, she used the wrong name entirely. Exhaustion. Delirium. Both. I crossed the kitchen in 3 steps and knelt beside them. Rosie's skin was flushed with mottled red patches across her chest and arms. Her lips looked dry and cracked, her eyes, usually bright and curious, always tracking movement, stared past me with no focus at all. Listless. That's the word doctors use, the word that means a baby has stopped fighting. "How long has the AC been off?" I kept my voice controlled, steady, the voice I used when a job site compressor failed and people were depending on me to fix it. Valentina's eyes filled. "I don't know. Days. I tried calling the repair company, but he said, Darren, he said we couldn't afford it right now. He said to just use fans." I looked around the kitchen. No fans, no ice packs, no cool water bottles. Just 2 people baking alive in a house that should have been 68 degrees. "I'm sorry," Valentina said. "I'm so sorry." She was apologizing. The victim was apologizing. I reached out and touched Rosie's forehead. Her skin felt like I'd pressed my palm against hot coals. Burning. Radiating heat that shouldn't exist in a 7-month-old body. This is what the absence of cold air sounds like, a 7-month-old too weak to cry. I lifted Rosie gently from Valentina's arms. The baby barely reacted. No reaching, no recognition. No infant reflex to grab at my collar or pull my glasses. Just shallow breaths and half-closed eyes that didn't track my face. I held her against my chest and felt her heart racing, tiny hummingbird pulse working overtime to cool a body that couldn't regulate its own temperature yet. Then I looked down at her hands. Her fingertips weren't pink. They weren't red. They were bluish-purple, the color that means the body is shutting down. The color that means you're running out of time. I looked up from Rosie's fingers toward the hallway, past the kitchen, past the living room, down toward the closed master bedroom door at the end of the house. Behind that door, barely audible but unmistakable, soft music played. Task 1.2. I handed Rosie back to Valentina and stood up. The music from the bedroom could wait. First, I needed to know why there was no air conditioning in a house where I'd personally installed every component of the HVAC system 4 years ago. "I'll check the electrical panel," I said. Valentina nodded without speaking, cradling Rosie against her chest on that kitchen floor. I walked down the hallway toward the utility room, past family photos on walls I'd painted myself, past the thermostat, still reading 98 degrees. I'd spent 30 years installing air conditioning systems across Texas, and I knew the exact difference between a circuit breaker that tripped automatically and one that had been deliberately turned off by hand. The metal electrical panel was mounted in a small alcove off the main hallway, standard residential placement, nothing fancy. I designed this system myself when Darren and Valentina moved in. 2-stage central AC with zoned ductwork backup generator hookup, the kind of setup that could keep a house cool through a Category 3 hurricane. I opened the panel door. Breakers 1 through 13, up. On. Normal. Breakers 14 and 15. The pair that controlled the central AC compressor and air handler were flipped down, off position. I ran my finger along the switches. No burn marks. No discoloration from electrical overload. No sign of automatic trip from a power surge or equipment failure. The breakers were cool to the touch. No heat signature that would indicate they'd struggled before failing. Someone had turned this off. On purpose. I flipped both breakers back up with two sharp clicks that echoed in the silent hallway. 3 seconds later, I heard the sound I'd been listening for, the deep mechanical hum of the outdoor compressor kicking to life. Then the whoosh of the air handler fan engaging inside the attic plenum. Then quieter but unmistakable to someone who'd spent 3 decades calibrating these systems, the whisper of cold air beginning to move through sheet metal ducts toward registers 40 feet away. The hum of a compressor starting up. The sound that meant safety. The sound that meant someone would live through the night. I stood in that dim hallway and listened to my own engineering come back to life. In 15 minutes, the house temperature would drop to 90 degrees. In 30 minutes, 85. In an hour, the thermostat would reach its set point of 72, and the system would stabilize. Rosie would survive. Valentina would recover. But someone had turned those breakers off. The music was still playing, soft, muffled by the closed door at the end of the hallway. The master bedroom. I walked toward it slowly, one hand trailing along the wall, fingers passing over AC registers that were just beginning to exhale cool air into the superheated house. I stopped outside the bedroom door. The music was clearer now, something instrumental jazz, maybe the kind of background noise you'd play while working on a laptop or reading. I raised my hand and knocked twice. "Darren." No answer. I knocked again, harder. Still nothing. I turned the handle and pushed the door open. Cold air hit me like I'd opened a freezer, a physical wall of 65-degree conditioned atmosphere pouring out into the 98-degree hallway. Not from the central system I'd just restarted. From a mini-split AC unit mounted high on the wall, the kind of independent system you install when you want climate control separate from the rest of the house. The bedroom was dark blackout curtains drawn against the mid-morning sun, but I could see everything I needed to see. Darren sat on the king-sized bed back, propped against the headboard, legs stretched out, laptop open on his thighs. He was 35 years old, my only son, wearing an immaculate white linen shirt that didn't have a single drop of sweat on it. His hair was perfect. His face was dry. He looked like a man who'd spent the morning in air-conditioned comfort, because he had. On the pillow beside him, Valentina's pillow, the side of the bed where my daughter-in-law had slept for 3 years, a woman I'd never met lay sleeping. Dark hair spread across white cotton. 32, maybe 33. Wearing one of Valentina's robes. On the nightstand, 2 glasses of ice water sat, sweating condensation onto the wood finish. Ice cubes still floating. Still cold. Darren looked up from his laptop screen. "Dad," he said, not standing up, not closing the laptop, not asking why I was there a day early. Just casual recognition, like I'd walked in on him watching television. "You're early." I stood in the doorway and said nothing. 10 seconds of silence. 20. The woman stirred, but didn't wake. The mini-split AC hummed its quiet 65-degree hum. Somewhere 40 feet away on a kitchen floor, my granddaughter was dying of heat exposure while ice cubes melted in her father's bedroom. "My Valentina and Rosie are on the kitchen floor," I said. My voice came out flat, mechanical. "Rosie's fingertips are blue." Darren glanced at the woman beside him, then back at me. "It's not that hot," he said. "She's being dramatic." Not that hot. 98 degrees inside the house. 103 outside. A 7-month-old infant with blue fingertips and mottled skin. A wife sitting on tile because it was the only surface cool enough to touch. Not that hot. I looked at my son, the boy I'd raised, the man I'd built a company for, the father who sat in air-conditioned luxury while his daughter's body shut down, and something inside me I'd been holding together for 30 years of sacrifice and 18-hour days, and building something for the next generation went completely, irreversibly cold. Darren must have seen it in my face. He shifted on the bed, finally looking uncomfortable. "Look, the central AC was costing too much to run all the time," he said. "I turned it off to save on the electric bill. This mini-split is way more efficient for just one room." The woman beside him opened her eyes. I stood there in the doorway, 65-degree air pouring past me into the hallway, and watched my son shrug, like it was a reasonable trade-off. Like math. One room at 65 versus 3 rooms at 98. His comfort versus their survival. I didn't say another word. I turned and walked back down the hallway toward the kitchen, toward Rosie, toward the phone in my pocket, and the decision that was already forming in my mind with the cold precision of a compressor clicking on. I walked back down the hallway toward the kitchen, toward Rosie, toward the decision that had already crystallized in my mind with the mechanical certainty of a thermostat clicking into place. In 30 years of negotiating $100 million HVAC contracts across Texas, I'd learned that the most powerful thing a man can say is absolutely nothing at all. But I stopped in the master bedroom doorway one more time, turned back, looked at my son for 10 unblinking seconds, the same boardroom stare I'd used to break men who thought they could lowball Ashford Climate Systems on a bid. Darren shifted on the bed. The woman beside him pulled the sheet higher. "Dad, listen." Darren started, his hands moving to close the laptop. "The central AC was acting up last week, and this room has its own unit, so I just thought." I let the silence stretch. 5 seconds. 10. His explanation died mid-sentence. "You go check on your daughter," I said. 5 words. Low voice. No anger. No volume. Just 5 words delivered with the same flat tone I'd use to read a weather report. Then I turned and walked away, leaving the bedroom door wide open behind me so the 65-degree air could bleed out into the hallway, mixing with the heat, wasting electricity, costing him money he claimed he didn't have. I walked through the living room, past Valentina still sitting on the kitchen tile with Rosie limp in her arms, out to the garage. My GMC Denali SUV sat in the 3-car bay next to Darren's empty space wherever his car was. He'd been home long enough to get comfortable. I climbed into the driver's seat, started the engine, and set the AC to 65 degrees. The vents began pumping cold air across my face. My hands were shaking on the steering wheel, the first physical sign of emotion since I'd walked through that unlocked front door an hour ago. Physical violence lasts a minute. Financial revenge lasts a lifetime. I pulled out my phone and scrolled to a number I'd had saved for 3 decades. Eugene Lancaster. Trust attorney. The man who'd structured every legal entity I owned, every property transfer, every estate document. He answered on the second ring. "Lawrence." Eugene's voice came through calm and measured, 68 years old, and he still worked Mondays. "You're back from Chicago." "Eugene, I need the Memorial Drive property documents." A pause. "The house, the one you transferred to." "All of them," I said. "Trust papers, deed, transfer documents, everything." "Is everything all right?" "I need to know exactly what my son legally owns," I said. "And I need to know it today." Another pause. Eugene had been my attorney long enough to recognize when a question would get answered and when it wouldn't. "I'll pull the files," he said. "Give me 2 hours." 1 hour, I said, and hung up. I sat in the garage for another 5 minutes, letting the AC cool my face, letting my pulse slow back to normal. The trembling in my hands gradually stopped. When I walked back into the house, I was perfectly calm. The central AC had been running for 90 minutes by then. The hallway thermostat read 86 degrees, dropping but slowly. Too slowly for a 7-month-old who'd been baking in triple-digit heat for days. I found Valentina in the living room at 12:30, still holding Rosie, trying to stand up from where she'd moved to the sofa. Her legs buckled. She caught herself on the armrest barely. I crossed the room and took Rosie from her arms before she could fall. The baby was limp, barely responsive. I pressed the back of my hand to her neck, the most accurate place to check an infant's core temperature, and felt heat that shouldn't exist in human skin. 104 degrees, maybe higher. "I'm sorry," Valentina whispered. "Arthur. I mean Lawrence. I should have—" She was apologizing. Still apologizing. The conditioned reflex of someone who'd been made to believe that her husband's cruelty was somehow her responsibility. "Don't apologize," I said, keeping my voice firm but gentle. "This isn't your fault." I looked down at Rosie. Her eyes were half closed. Her breathing was shallow and rapid. Her skin had the mottled flush I'd seen once before, 40 years ago, when a warehouse worker collapsed from heat stroke on one of my early job sites. We'd gotten him to a hospital in time. Barely. "She's burning up," I said. "I'm calling 911. I pulled out my phone and dialed while carrying Rosie toward the kitchen. Wet towels, ice water. Anything to bring her core temperature down while we waited. The dispatcher answered. I gave the address, described the symptoms, explained the heat exposure. 8 minutes, she said. Ambulance in 8 minutes. I wrapped cold, wet towels around Rosie's torso and legs, while Valentina sat on the sofa, too weak to stand. The baby didn't react to the cold, didn't cry, didn't flinch. That was the worst sign of all. 7 minutes later, red and blue lights flashed through the front windows, painting the walls in rotating color. I heard the diesel engine of the ambulance, heard doors slamming, heard professional voices calling coordinates over radio. I opened the front door before they could knock. 2 paramedics came through fast, a woman in her 40s and a younger man, both carrying equipment bags. The woman took one look at Rosie and her expression shifted into the controlled urgency of someone who knows they're racing a clock. High infant hyperthermia, she said to her partner. Get the stretcher, we're transporting both. They worked efficiently. Portable monitor hooked to Rosie's chest. IV line started in Valentina's arm. Oxygen mask over the baby's face. Within 3 minutes, they had them both on a stretcher headed toward the ambulance. Sir, are you riding with them? The male paramedic asked. Yes, I said. I climbed into the back of the ambulance and sat on the bench seat while they secured the stretcher. Through the open doors, I could see the house, my gift to my son, the place I'd imagined grandchildren growing up safe and comfortable. The bedroom window stayed dark. No curtain moved. No door opened. The master bedroom remained sealed, curtains drawn. Darren hadn't come out, not when his wife collapsed, not when the sirens screamed down Memorial Drive, not when his daughter was carried past his window on a stretcher with an oxygen mask covering her face. The paramedic closed the ambulance doors. The siren started its wail. We pulled away from the curb. I memorized that detail, the dark window, the closed door, the silence. I memorize everything. The ambulance took 14 minutes through midday Houston traffic. I sat watching the paramedic adjust Rosie's oxygen mask, watching Valentina's eyes drift closed from exhaustion, watching the monitor track my granddaughter's racing heart. The pediatrician's expression told me everything before she spoke a single word. In 30 years of negotiating contracts across Texas, I'd learned to read faces the way other men read balance sheets, and this face said my granddaughter had been 2 hours from death. Dr. Rachel Thornton met me in the hallway outside the pediatric emergency department at 2:15 that afternoon. She was maybe 45, with the measured composure of someone who'd spent 15 years treating heat-related injuries in Texas summers. The kind of doctor who chose words carefully because parents remember every syllable. Mr. Ashford, she said, guiding me to a quiet corner where the air conditioning hummed at 68 degrees. Your granddaughter's temperature on arrival was 104.8 degrees. Severe infant hyperthermia with dehydration. I nodded, waited. We've started cooling protocols and IV fluids. She's responding well. Dr. Thornton paused. If she had been brought in 2 to 3 hours later, we would be looking at seizures, organ stress, potentially fatal outcomes. 2 to 3 hours. I'd found them at 10:30. Called the ambulance at 12:30. If I'd stayed in Chicago one more day, if I'd come home tomorrow as scheduled, I would have been planning a funeral. What were the conditions at home, Mr. Ashford? Dr. Thornton asked carefully. The question a mandated reporter asks when a 7-month-old shows up with life-threatening heat exposure. The central AC was turned off, I said, manually, at the breaker. Her expression didn't change, but her fingers moved slightly, making a mental note. And how long was it off? A days. Is the mother all right? We're treating her for dehydration as well. She will be, I said. Dr. Thornton nodded. Rosie will need to stay for observation, 48 hours minimum. Whatever she needs, I said. Someone from Child Protective Services may want to speak with you about the home environment. I understand. She gave me a room number and walked away. I stood in that hallway listening to medical equipment hum, thinking about 2 to 3 hours. The daughter I still had, and the funeral I'd almost needed to plan. I walked to the waiting room and sat in a plastic chair. My phone buzzed at 4 o'clock. A text from a contact saved as RT. Confirmed. Subject not at hospital. Uber receipt, Four Seasons Spa, downtown. Card ending 4471. I read it twice. Committed 4471 to memory. That was the secondary credit card I'd given Darren 3 years ago with a $5,000 limit. For family emergencies, medical bills, car repairs, emergencies. Richard Tanner was a private investigator I'd hired 2 weeks before returning from Chicago. Not because I suspected infidelity, but because Valentina had stopped sending photos of Rosie in mid-June. When I called to check in, her answers were too short, too careful, too rehearsed. I'd hired Tanner to watch, to document, to tell me if my instinct was right. 2 weeks of surveillance, and I already knew something was wrong. I just didn't know how wrong. I texted back, continue. At 5:33 images arrived. The first photo showed the Four Seasons Spa interior, the downtown location that cost more per hour than most people made in a day. Darren sat in a white luxury bathrobe on a leather lounger, feet propped up holding champagne. Beside him, Saskia lay face down on a massage table in a matching robe. The timestamp read 15:45, 3:45 p.m., 90 minutes after Rosie was admitted to the pediatric emergency room. The second photo showed a credit card receipt. Four Seasons Spa. Couples massage package with champagne service. Card ending 4471. Total $847. $847. 90 minutes. Emergency card. Champagne. I stared at my son's face in that bathrobe, at the champagne flute in his hand, at the woman I'd never met getting a massage on my money, while his wife recovered from heat exhaustion 40 blocks away. The emergency card. I saved the receipt photo, saved the timestamp, saved the image of Saskia's face, the woman who'd been sleeping on Valentina's pillow, while Rosie's fingertips turned blue. I save everything. Down the hall, a monitor beeped. A nurse called out room numbers. Somewhere in this building, Valentina slept beside Rosie's hospital crib, probably the first real sleep she'd gotten in days now that the temperature was safe. And 90 minutes after their ambulance arrived, Darren had been drinking champagne. I looked at the photo one more time. White bathrobe, propped feet, casual smile. The posture of a man without a care in the world. Then I opened my contacts and scrolled to Eugene Lancaster's number. In 30 years of building an empire, I'd learned that the quietest thing a man can do is gather evidence. But the loudest thing a man can do is make a phone call. I pressed dial. Eugene answered on the first ring. I need to know something, I said. When I transferred the Memorial Drive property to Darren 3 years ago, what exactly did I transfer and what did I keep? A pause. Let me pull up the documents, Eugene said. I waited, phone pressed to my ear, staring at the photo of my son in a bathrobe. The deed transferred, Eugene said slowly. But the property is part of the family trust. You retained reversionary interest if certain conditions are met. What conditions? Abandonment, failure to maintain, material breach of fiduciary duty to dependents. I felt something cold and precise click into place in my chest. Like a thermostat, like a compressor engaging. Draft the paperwork, I said. Lawrence. And draft it, I said. I'll call you tonight with the rest. I hung up and sat in that cold waiting room, holding my phone, staring at the photo of my son holding champagne 1 hour after his daughter stopped breathing properly. I saved the receipt. I saved the timestamp. I saved the photo of Saskia's face. That night at Houston Methodist, while Valentina slept beside Rosie's hospital crib, I would read messages on an iPad my son left unlocked and discover that $847 was the smallest theft of all. Eugene said he'd have the draft documents ready by morning. I hung up and sat in the hospital waiting room, staring at my phone at the photo of my son drinking champagne while his daughter fought for her life. Darren arrived at Houston Methodist Hospital 6 hours after Rosie was admitted with life-threatening hyperthermia, and the first thing I noticed wasn't the absence of tears. It was his dead mother's Rolex Submariner glinting on his wrist, the watch she'd left him in her will for moments that mattered. He walked into the waiting room at 7:45, wearing an immaculate linen vest. No sweat, no tears, no coffee for his wife. He glanced around, spotted me, and walked over with the casual posture of a man arriving for a business meeting. "How is she?" he asked, pulling out his phone to check something. I looked at my son, really looked at him, and saw the Rolex catch the fluorescent light. The watch his mother had left him, with specific written instructions to wear only on days that truly mattered. Graduation, wedding, birth of his daughter, moments of genuine significance. He'd worn it to a spa. Shock 104.8 degrees, I said. Numbers only, no emotion. 2 hours from critical. Darren nodded, glanced at the Rolex to check the time, and sat down in the chair across from me. "They said she'll be okay though, right?" He was still looking at his phone. "They said she'll live," I said. He nodded again, scrolled, typed something, set the phone face down on his lap. We sat in silence for 40 minutes. I watched him check his watch 3 more times. Never asked about Valentina. Never asked to see Rosie. Just sat there in his clean linen vest, scrolling his phone while his wife slept beside their daughter's hospital crib down the hall. At 8:30, he stood up. "I'm going to get coffee," he said. "You want anything?" "No." He walked toward the cafeteria, leaving his iPad on the chair beside where he'd been sitting. The screen was still lit, showing some kind of investment portfolio app with green and red numbers I couldn't read from across the waiting room. I stared at that device for 10 seconds. I'm not a man who violates privacy. I built a company on trust and contracts and handshake agreements that meant something. But I'd also sat in this hospital for 6 hours watching my granddaughter fight for her life while my son got a couples massage. I stood up, crossed the waiting room, and picked up the iPad. The screen was unlocked. Face ID still active. No password required. I opened the Messages app, searched for Valentina's name. The last message from Darren to his wife was sent 5 days ago. 4 words. "Don't use the AC, I told you." Not a request. An order. A warning. Before that, nothing for 3 days. Before that, "Where's my blue shirt?" Before that, "I'll be late, don't wait up." I scrolled back through 2 months of messages to Valentina. 18 total. Most were instructions. None were questions about Rosie. None were terms of endearment. None were the messages a husband sends to a wife he loves. Then I searched Saskia's name. Hundreds of messages, photos of restaurants, hotel reservations, flight confirmations, tomorrow's plans, next week's plans, next month's plans. A whole parallel life that she knew about that they'd built together, while Valentina sat in that house with no air conditioning, wondering why her husband told her not to turn it on. Is it a violation of privacy to read your son's messages? Or is it a violation of trust to let your wife and daughter burn while you plan vacations with your mistress? I kept scrolling. At 8:45, I opened the banking app on the iPad. Still unlocked. Still trusting Face ID to protect him. The joint checking account came up first, the account I'd set up 3 years ago when Darren and Valentina got married. The account I deposited $15,000 into every month to cover family expenses. Mortgage, utility, groceries, Rosie's needs, everything a young family requires. Current balance $847. I opened the transaction history, started scrolling backward. 1 month, 2 months, 6 months, 14 months, transfers out to 3 different crypto exchange accounts. Transfers to 2 personal accounts I didn't recognize. Transfers labeled investment and business opportunity and loan repayment. I added them up in my head, the same mental math I'd used for 30 years to bid HVAC contracts without a calculator. $283,440. Gone. The highest single month was March. $42,000 moved out in 6 transfers over 3 weeks. I scrolled to Rosie's expenses. Formula, diapers, pediatrician visits, searched the past 3 months. $0. Nothing spent on my granddaughter in 90 days from an account that received $45,000 in that same period. Then I filtered by Valentina's card. The debit card attached to this account that she used for groceries, for gas, for anything she needed. $200 a month, $283,000 stolen. 200 versus 283,000. Every month, like clockwork, $200. Sometimes $197, sometimes $203. But averaging exactly $200, the allowance her husband gave her from an account her father-in-law funded with $15,000 monthly. $200. That's what he thought his wife was worth. I looked at the cafeteria entrance. No sign of Darren yet. I took 3 screenshots with the iPad's camera. Transferred them to my phone. Deleted the transfer notification. Cleared the screenshot folder. Put everything back exactly as it had been. Then I placed the iPad back on the chair, straightening the cover to match the angle, making sure the screen showed the same portfolio page with the same green and red numbers. Darren walked back into the waiting room 2 minutes later, carrying a paper cup of coffee. He sat down, picked up his iPad, glanced at the screen, and set it on his lap without noticing a single thing had changed. I looked at my son across the waiting room. The son who'd just stolen $283,000, who'd given his wife a $200 allowance, who'd worn his dead mother's watch to a spa and smiled. "Coffee good?" I asked. "On hospital coffee," he said, shrugging. "You know how it is." "I do," I said, and I did. I knew exactly how it was. We sat in that waiting room for another hour making small talk about nothing. Darren scrolled his phone. I sat perfectly still, watching him memorizing every detail, building the case in my mind with the same precision I'd used to bid contracts for 30 years. At 9 o'clock, he fell asleep in the chair, head tilted back, iPad resting on his lap. There are words that end marriages, words that end friendships, and words that end a father's last willingness to show mercy. And I was about to read all 3 kinds in 8 words my son had typed that morning at 9 a.m., 3 hours before I found Rosie with blue fingertips. I stood up, walked across the waiting room, and picked up the iPad for the second time. The Messages app was still open. I scrolled down past Valentina's name, past Saskia's name, down to the archived conversations section. There was one thread with no contact name attached. Just a phone number. I opened it. The phone number was Saskia's. I recognized it from the other thread. This was the real conversation. The one they'd archived. The one they didn't want showing up in the main message list where someone might see it. I started scrolling backward through 6 months of messages. 6 months ago, early January. Once the baby's old enough, she can't claim you abandoned them. File then. Darren's reply. How old is old enough? Saskia. 6 months, Texas law. After 6 months, you're safe. 4 months ago, March. The house is in your name, right? She has nowhere to go. You keep it. Darren, Dad put it in my name as a wedding gift. It's mine. Saskia, perfect. File for divorce, keep the house, she moves back with her parents. 3 months ago, April. What about selling it? We could get $2 million easy for that location. Darren. Let me think about it. Rental income might be better long term. They'd been planning this for half a year. Since before Rosie could sit up. Since before she could roll over. Since she was an infant who couldn't even recognize her own father's face. I kept scrolling forward, getting closer to today, feeling something cold and permanent settling into my chest. 2 weeks ago. The AC is costing a fortune. I'm turning off the central and just using the bedroom unit. Saskia, smart. Let her sweat a little. She'll leave on her own. 1 week ago. She keeps asking to turn it back on. I told her we can't afford it. Saskia. You're worth $3 million if your dad ever dies. She can survive without AC for a few weeks. Then I reached that morning's messages. Timestamp 9:07 a.m. 3 hours before I walked through that unlocked front door. 3 hours before I found Valentina on the kitchen floor. 3 hours before I saw Rosie's blue fingertips. Darren had typed, if both of them died from the heat, it would save me the trouble. Less paperwork. I read it 3 times. 8 words. Less paperwork. My granddaughter dying would be less paperwork. I don't know when my son became a man who could type those words. But I knew that a man who could type those words had already stopped being my son. Saskia had replied with a laughing emoji and, don't even joke about that. But Darren hadn't been joking. I could tell by the timestamp. He'd typed it at 9:07, then turned off the central AC at the breaker sometime that week, then gone to the Four Seasons spa, while his wife and daughter baked in 98-degree heat. He'd meant it. I took screenshots of the entire conversation, transferred them to my phone, deleted the evidence of transfer, put the iPad back on Darren's lap exactly as it had been. Then I walked out of the hospital through the sliding glass doors across the parking lot to my GMC Denali. Got in, started the engine, set the AC to 65 degrees. I sat there for 30 seconds, staring at the Houston skyline through the windshield, watching the lights of downtown shimmer in the July heat haze. Then I pulled out my phone and called Eugene Lancaster. He answered on the 3rd ring despite the late hour, 10:37 p.m. Lawrence, he said. Everything all right? The house, Eugene, Memorial Drive. Walk me through ownership, every detail. I heard papers rustling, computer keys clicking. Eugene had already pulled the files. He'd known this call was coming, since I'd asked him to draft the reversal documents that afternoon. The Memorial Drive estate is absolute property of the Ashford Family Revocable Living Trust, Eugene said. You're the trustee and sole grantor. Darren and Valentina signed an occupancy agreement in 2022, not a deed transfer. They're legal guests, Lawrence. Occupants, not owners. He thinks he owns it, I said. Most people think occupant signature means owner signature when their father hands them the keys to a $2 million house, Eugene said carefully. Darren didn't read the fine print. Wait, how much notice do I need to give? For what? Eviction. A pause. Texas Property Code. Section 24.005. Eugene said slowly. 3 days for structural risk or urgent renovation. The faulty AC system qualifies as urgent, especially after today's events. 3 days, I repeated. Not 3 weeks, not negotiable. 3 days until the locks change. Draft it, I said. 3 copies, tonight. Lawrence. Tonight, Eugene. Another pause. Then, you're sure? I looked at my phone at the screenshot of my son's message. 8 words. Less paperwork. I've never been more sure of anything in my life, I said. I'll have it ready within the hour, Eugene said. Where do you want to meet? My office, 3 a.m., 3 in the morning. I want this filed when the courthouse opens at 8, I said. That means we prep tonight. Understood, Eugene said. I'll be there. I hung up and looked at my watch in the dark parking lot 10:37 p.m. on Monday night. Eugene would have the notice to vacate drafted within the hour. The occupancy agreement Darren had signed without reading, because men like Darren never read what they're signing when they think they're winning, gave me the legal right to reclaim my property with 72 hours' notice. I had dropped the guillotine. Now all that was left was to watch the blade fall. 3 days. The clock started now. I put the GMC in reverse and pulled out of the parking spot, leaving the hospital behind. Leaving my son asleep in that waiting room with his iPad full of evidence he didn't know I'd already copied. By 3:47 a.m. Tuesday morning, while Darren slept at home in his 65-degree bedroom, Eugene and I would execute the coldest corporate strategy of my 30-year career. And Darren would wake up Thursday morning to find himself owning exactly nothing. I drove to Ashford Climate Systems headquarters through empty Houston streets at 2:45 a.m. The city slept under a heat advisory, but the 22nd floor corner office lights were already on when I arrived. At 3 o'clock in the morning on Tuesday, while most of Houston slept, I sat in my corner office pouring my first glass of bourbon in 30 years. Not because I needed courage for what came next, but because dismantling your son's entire life in one night deserved to be remembered. Eugene Lancaster arrived at 3:15 carrying a leather portfolio and the notice to vacate printed in triplicate. The city lights glittered below us through floor-to-ceiling windows. I'd set the office AC to 68 degrees, cool enough to think clearly, cold enough to stay sharp. Coffee, I asked. I'll take bourbon, Eugene said, setting the portfolio on my desk. If you're pouring. I poured 2 glasses and slid one across the mahogany surface. We reviewed the document together. 3 pages. Legal language that translated to simple facts. Darren and Valentina occupied Memorial Drive Estate via occupancy agreement. Dated March 2022, not ownership. Material breach of Section 4C, willful endangerment of trust property occupants. Notice to vacate effective immediately, removal required within 72 hours, per Texas Property Code, Section 24.05. Are you certain about this, Lawrence? Eugene asked, pen hovering over the signature line. Once we execute, there's no turning back. I looked at the document. Thought about 8 words. Less paperwork. I'm certain, I said. By 3:45 this morning, Darren will have authorized access to nothing. I signed all 3 copies as trustee of the Ashford Family Revocable Living Trust. Eugene witnessed and dated each signature. 3:42 a.m. Then we moved to Phase 2. I opened the banking portal on my computer. Joint checking account, the one I funded monthly, the one Darren had drained. I navigated to authorized users. 2 names listed: Darren Ashford, Saskia Henderson. I removed both. Clicked confirm. Timestamp 3:47 a.m. Then I transferred the remaining balance, $847, back to the trust operating account. Account balance $0. Authorized users 0. Credit cards? Eugene asked. Secondary card ending in 4471, I said. Emergency card with $5,000 limit. I pulled up the account, called the 24-hour fraud line, reported the card lost. They canceled it while I was on the phone. 3:51 a.m. Lock replacement, Eugene asked. Thursday 9 a.m. I said. I'll call the security company at 8. By 3:45 that morning, Darren had authorized user access to nothing a joint account that no longer existed, and exactly 72 hours before the locks changed on a house that was never his. Eugene raised his bourbon glass. To precision. I raised mine. To consequences. We drank. At 6:30 a.m. I drove to Memorial Drive Estate. Let myself in with my key. Made coffee in the kitchen that was finally cool again. The central AC I'd restarted yesterday had brought the house back to 72 degrees. I sat at the kitchen table in my full suit. Placed the notice to vacate envelope in the center of the table. Drank my coffee and waited. Darren came downstairs at 7:05 wearing pajama pants and a t-shirt. He stopped at the bottom of the stairs when he saw me sitting there. Stared. Walked over slowly. Down, he said cautiously. What are you doing here? I slid the envelope across the table. You've been served, I said. 3-day notice to vacate. You have until Thursday 9 a.m. He picked up the envelope like it might explode. Opened it. Pulled out the document. Started reading. I watched his face drain of color. This house is mine, he said, voice rising. You gave it to me. You can't do this. I said nothing. I'll sue, he said. I'll call my lawyer. You can't just... I opened my phone. Pulled up the scanned image I'd prepared at 4 a.m. The occupancy agreement. Page 3, paragraph 7, underlined in red on my screen. I slid the phone across the table. Darren picked it up. Read. His hands started shaking. Occupant signature, he whispered. I thought... This says... You signed it without reading, I said. Page 3, paragraph 7. Occupant agrees property remains sole asset of Ashford Family Revocable Living Trust. Trustee reserves right to terminate occupancy with 72 hours written notice. But you gave me this house, he said. His voice was breaking. You said it was mine. You said... I said you could live here, I said. I never said I was giving you ownership. You assumed. He looked at me the way he used to when he was 7 and had broken something he couldn't fix. Except he wasn't 7. He was 35. And the thing he'd broken wasn't a lamp. Dad, please, he said. Valentina and Rosie will be taken care of, I said. You turned off the air conditioning while your daughter nearly died. You spent yesterday at a spa. You typed 8 words about less paperwork. His face went white. You read my... Everything, I said. I read everything. A sound from upstairs. We both looked up. Saskia stood at the top of the stairs in one of Valentina's robes. She looked down at the scene, the envelope, my suit, Darren's face, the phone on the table showing the occupancy agreement. She stared for 3 seconds. Then she turned around and walked back toward the master bedroom. Her footsteps were quick, purposeful. Not the footsteps of someone settling in. The footsteps of someone calculating an exit. Darren was still staring at the notice to vacate. Where are we supposed to go? He whispered. I don't know, I said. And I don't care. I stood up, straightened my suit jacket, picked up my coffee cup, and walked it to the sink. To Thursday, 9 a.m., I said. If you're still here, the sheriff will remove you. Eugene has already filed the paperwork. Don't, I said. I walked toward the front door. Didn't look back. I had work to do. Behind me, I heard Darren sit down hard in the kitchen chair. Heard the envelope hit the table. Heard him start to cry. Not the tears of a man who's sorry for what he's done, but the tears of a man who's finally realized he's lost. I closed the front door behind me and got in my GMC. The sun was rising over Houston. Tuesday morning, day 1 of 3. At 10 a.m., I had an appointment at the hospital. Valentina needed to see an iPad. I drove to Houston Methodist Hospital at 9:30, parking in the same spot I'd used yesterday, walking through the same sliding glass doors, into the same 68-degree lobby where 24 hours ago I'd first seen proof my son could type 8 words about less paperwork. There are things a father can fix with money, things a father can fix with time, and things a father cannot fix at all. And placing that iPad in Valentina's hands, I knew I was about to break something that could never be repaired, but needed to be broken anyway. I rode the elevator to the 4th floor and walked down the hallway to room 412. Knocked once. Opened the door. Valentina sat propped up in the hospital bed, foiline still running into her left arm, her color better than yesterday, but still pale. Rosie slept in a clear plastic crib beside the bed, hooked to monitors that beeped softly every few seconds. The room was controlled at 70 degrees, cool, safe, stable. Valentina looked up when I entered. "How is she?" I asked, nodding toward Rosie. "So better," Valentina said. Her voice was stronger than yesterday. "Dr. Thornton says we can go home tomorrow if her levels stay stable." Home. The word hung in the air between us. I sat in the chair beside her bed. Pulled Darren's iPad from my briefcase, still unlocked, still showing everything. "There are some messages on here you should see," I said, placing the device on her lap. "Take your time." I stood up before she could ask questions, walked to the window, sat in the chair facing downtown Houston's skyline, giving her my back, giving her privacy and dignity while her marriage ended. I heard her pick up the iPad, heard her fingers on the screen, scrolling, tapping. Then I heard her draw one sharp breath. Not a gasp, not a sob. Just one quick intake of air, like someone had punched her in the stomach. Then silence. 1 minute, 2, 3, 5. She didn't cry, didn't speak, just read. I turned my head slightly and looked at Rosie through the crib bars. 7 months old. Skin the right color, now pink, not mottled red, not blue at the fingertips. Breathing steady. Heart rate normal. Alive because I'd come home one day early. I reached through the crib bars and rested my hand on Rosie's tiny hand. Her fingers wrapped around my thumb in that automatic infant grip that doesn't mean recognition, just reflex, just biology, telling a baby to hold on to whatever's close. Behind me, Valentina kept reading. I didn't turn back, didn't interrupt, didn't offer comfort I had no right to give. There are things a father-in-law cannot fix, but he can sit in the room while they break. After 7 minutes, I heard her set the iPad down on the bedside table. Heard her exhale slowly. Heard the sheets rustle as she shifted position. "Does he know you read this?" she asked. Her voice was perfectly calm. No tears, no trembling. Just cold, clear question. "Yes," I said, still facing the window. "Good," she said. I stood up, turned around, looked at her. She wasn't crying. Her jaw was set. Her eyes were dry. The woman who'd been apologizing yesterday on the kitchen floor, apologizing for being a victim, was gone. The woman looking at me now had made a decision. "I served him eviction papers this morning," I said. 3 days. The house is held in trust. He never owned it." She nodded slowly. "How long have you known?" "Since yesterday," I said, "when he left the iPad unlocked, and you waited until now to tell me." "I wanted you to read it yourself," I said. "Not hear it from me, not have me interpret it. Just see exactly what he wrote." She looked at Rosie, looked back at me. "Thank you," she said. 2 words. No elaboration. But I understood what she meant. Thank you for not protecting me from the truth. Thank you for letting me see it clearly. Thank you for giving me the evidence I'll need. I picked up my briefcase. "I'll let you rest, Lawrence," she said as I reached the door. I turned back. "Where will we go when we leave the hospital tomorrow?" My house," I said. "Guest room is already set up. You and Rosie stay as long as you need." She nodded. Didn't argue. Didn't ask if she could go back to Memorial Drive. She'd read the messages. She knew there was nothing there to go back to. I left her with the iPad and walked to the elevator. At 2 o'clock that afternoon, I was sitting in the first-floor hospital lobby when Darren walked in. He spotted me immediately, walked over. His expression had shifted from this morning's terror to something else. Negotiation mode. Not arrogant anymore, but not broken either. Pleading. Calculated pleading. "Dad," he said, sitting in the chair across from me without being invited. "I understand you're angry. I get it. I'm sorry about Rosie. I'll fix everything. I just need more time." I said nothing. Let him talk. "And I can make this right," he continued. "I'll pay back the money. I'll end things with Saskia. Valentina and I can work this out. Just give me time to—" "What is Valentina's monthly allowance?" I asked. He stopped mid-sentence. Blinked. "What?" "Simple question," I said. "What is your wife's monthly allowance?" "The amount you let her spend from the joint account I fund with $15,000 every month," he stammered. $200, I repeated. He nodded. I let that number sit in the air between us for 3 seconds. "And how much did you move out of the joint account in March?" I asked. His face went white. He had nothing to say to that. The number he'd chosen for his wife, $200, had become the number that ended the negotiation. He knew the answer. $42,000. 200 times what he thought his wife was worth in a single month. He couldn't say it aloud. I stood up, straightened my jacket. "Thursday, 9 a.m., Darren," I said. Not a minute later, I walked to the elevator, pressed the button. The doors opened immediately. I stepped inside and turned around. Darren was still sitting in the lobby chair, his mouth half open, trying to formulate an answer to a question whose truth he couldn't speak. The doors slid closed. I watched the floor numbers climb. 1, 2, 3. Upstairs, Valentina was reading those same numbers on the iPad, doing that same math, arriving at that same devastating conclusion. $200 a month for the woman who'd given him a daughter. $42,000 in a single month for himself. The math told the whole story. The elevator reached the 4th floor. I didn't go back to Valentina's room. I'd given her what she needed. Now she had to decide what to do with it. I drove to my office at Ashford Climate Systems headquarters and sat at my desk overlooking downtown Houston. At 4 o'clock, my phone buzzed. Text from Richard Tanner. "Subject not at hospital. ATM Memorial area. All cards declined. Video attached. I had executed corporate takeovers, dismantled competitors, and negotiated $100 million deals across 3 decades of building this company. But watching security camera footage of my son discover at a Memorial area ATM that every card had been declined one after another in the 100-degree July heat was the coldest business decision I'd ever made. I opened the video. Security footage from an outdoor ATM. Tuesday afternoon sun beating down on concrete. Darren standing at the machine in his linen vest, same clothes from the hospital lobby 2 hours ago. He inserted a card. Waited. The screen flashed something I couldn't read on the grainy footage, but I could read Darren's face confusion. He tried again. Same card, screen flash. More confusion becoming concern. Pulled out a second card. The secondary credit card. Inserted it. Waited. Screen flash. Declined. Pulled out a third card. Inserted. Waited. Declined. He stood there staring at the machine for 10 seconds. Pulled out his phone. Made a call. spoke for maybe 30 seconds, hung up, stared at the phone. Then he looked around the parking lot like someone had played a trick on him and might be watching. My computer chimed with a banking system alert. Authorized user removal processed 03:47 a.m. Tuesday. Joint account transfer complete. Another alert. Secondary card account 4:1. Cancellation processed. Nothing bearing Darren's name remained in my financial system except $127,400 in debt. The loans I'd guaranteed that Eugene was preparing to transfer back to him personally. The cards had died 12 hours ago at 3:47 a.m. Darren was discovering it now at 4 p.m. He'd been locked out for 12 hours and didn't know until he tried to buy something. Tried to use money he thought was his. Discovered he owned nothing. There's a difference between precision and cruelty. Precision is turning off the cards at 3:47 a.m. Cruelty is watching him discover it 12 hours later on camera, one declined transaction at a time. I watched the video 3 more times, saved it to my phone, sent Richard a reply, "Continue surveillance." Then I opened the creditor notification template Eugene had drafted and began entering the details. Account number, total transferred, timeline, evidence of misappropriation. By 5 p.m. Tuesday, every lender who'd extended credit to Darren with my guarantee would receive formal notice that the guarantee was withdrawn and the borrower had misused joint household funds. Default clauses would trigger. Payment acceleration would begin. The walls were closing. I went home. Checked on Valentina and Rosie. They'd been discharged from the hospital at 6 p.m., and I'd moved them into my guest room with a crib I'd had delivered that afternoon. Valentina thanked me quietly, put Rosie to bed, and went to her own room without asking where Darren was. She already knew he wasn't here. She'd read the messages. She knew exactly what he was and where he'd be. Wednesday morning at 9 a.m., I was back in my office when Eugene called. "Darren hired an attorney," he said. "Todd Brennan. Called me 20 minutes ago demanding negotiation." "And this time?" I asked. "I'm putting you on speaker," Eugene said. "He's calling back in 30 seconds. I want you to hear this." The phone rang. Eugene answered. "Eugene Lancaster. Todd Brennan here, representing Darren Ashford," a voice said. Young, confident. Hadn't done his homework yet. "I've reviewed the notice to vacate you served my client. I believe it might be challengeable." "On what grounds?" Eugene asked, his voice perfectly neutral. "Equitable interest," Brennan said. "My client has occupied the property for 3 years, made improvements, established it as primary residence. Texas courts recognize the occupancy agreement has an explicit clause excluding equitable interest." Eugene interrupted. "Section 4, subsection C. Your client signed it and initialed it separately. Page 3, paragraph 7. A pause. I'll need to review. Furthermore," Eugene continued, "Mr. Lawrence Ashford is preparing a formal report to creditors detailing the misuse of $283,440 from joint account funds. That report will trigger default clauses in your client's existing loan agreements. I believe the total outstanding is $127,400 across 3 lenders." Silence. I looked at my watch. Started counting. 1 second, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. 8 seconds of dead air. That's how long it takes a lawyer to realize his client signed away his own house without reading the contract. Brennan's voice had changed completely. "I'll call you back." "Of course," Eugene said. The line went dead. Eugene took me off speaker. They never call back when they realize the other side read every page. "How long until he tells Darren there's no defense?" I asked. He's probably calling him right now, Eugene said, telling him to negotiate for more time or start packing. Darren won't pack, I said. He'll think there's still a way out. Is there? Eugene asked. No, I said. Thursday, 9 a.m., the locks change. If he's inside, the sheriff removes him. The creditor notification goes out at noon today. By tonight, every lender in Houston will have a fraud report with his name on it. I hung up and opened my laptop. Pulled up the creditor notification one more time. Read through it carefully. $283,440 misappropriated from joint household funds over 14 months. 3 crypto exchange accounts. 2 unverified personal accounts. $0 spent on dependent minor child in final 90 days. I attached the bank statements. Attached the screenshots from Darren's iPad showing the planning with Saskia. Attached the timeline. Then I clicked send to all 3 lenders. The clock was ticking. The walls were closing. And Darren still thought he had a way out. The creditor notifications went out at noon Wednesday. By 2 p.m., I'd received confirmation emails from all 3 lenders, fraud reports, logged payment acceleration, initiated guarantor withdrawal, processed. Darren's credit would be destroyed by Friday. At 2 o'clock that afternoon, my phone buzzed with a text from Richard Tanner. Intercepted message. Saskia's phone. Not sent to your son. See attachment. I opened the image. A text message from Saskia Henderson to a contact saved as M. Old man pulled the money. Ryan has nothing left. Might need to accelerate my timeline. Ryan. She'd called him Ryan in the message to someone else. Not Darren. The name was wrong. My son's name is Darren, but the contempt was perfectly clear. Saskia Henderson had done this before. Found a man with money, promised him everything, waited until his accounts ran dry, then disappeared with whatever valuable items she could carry. And I was about to watch her execute the exact same pattern on my son in real time. Except this time I'd been tracking her moves for 2 weeks. I called Richard. The recipient, I said. Who's M? Marcus Whitfield, Richard said. 38. Works in commercial real estate. They've been dating concurrently for 6 weeks. Dinners twice a week while your son thought she was visiting her sister. Background. Clean, divorced, makes about $200,000 a year, owns a condo in Midtown. I pulled up the PI report Richard had sent me 2 weeks ago when I'd first hired him. The background check on Saskia Henderson. I'd read it once. Now I read it again. Dallas, 3 years ago. Relationship with investment banker named Michael Sutton. Lasted 14 months. Sutton reported $180,000 missing from joint accounts. Filed fraud complaint. Saskia Henderson disappeared before charges were filed. Case dropped due to insufficient evidence and complainant declining to pursue. Same pattern, different city, different man, same outcome. She was a serial predator with an established playbook. Find everything about Marcus, I said. Location, employment, assets. I want to know where she's going when she leaves. Copy that, Richard said. I hung up and called Eugene. Add Saskia Henderson to the creditor fraud notification, I said. I want her name on every report in Houston. She helped plan the theft. She knew about the joint account. Put her name on record. Legally, that's accurate, I said. The messages show she advised him on timing. That's conspiracy to commit fraud. Add her name. I'll file an amended notification, Eugene said. Darren was having done to him exactly what he'd done to Valentina. Used, drained, abandoned the moment the money stopped flowing. Karma doesn't always come from heaven. Sometimes it comes from Houston wearing designer clothes. I worked through the rest of Wednesday afternoon. Checked on Valentina and Rosie at my house. They were settling into the guest room. Rosie's color fully back to normal, Valentina quiet but calm. Made calls to the locksmith confirming Thursday 9 a.m. Made calls to Eugene confirming the repossession crew. Everything was in place. At 11 o'clock, Wednesday night, I sat alone in my 22nd floor corner office. Tomorrow at 9 a.m., the locks would change. Tomorrow at 9 a.m., a repossession crew would arrive. Tomorrow at 9 a.m., Darren would discover that the house he thought was his had always belonged to my trust. I poured a second glass of bourbon, the bottle I'd opened Tuesday at 3 a.m., when Eugene and I had executed the financial lockout. Sat in the dark office looking at Houston's lights scattered across the heat-hazed July night. For the first and only time in this entire execution, I allowed myself to doubt. I thought about Darren at age 7 standing beside me on the first major job site for Ashford Climate Systems, wearing a hard hat 3 sizes too big, asking me to teach him how to read HVAC blueprints. I thought about Darren at 14, spending his summer on scorching factory roofs, with installation crews learning the business from the ground up, because he said he wanted to run it someday. I thought about Darren at 18 graduation day, when I'd given him the Rolex Submariner that had belonged to my wife, his mother, with her handwritten note inside the box, "Wear this on days that matter." When did that boy become a man who could type 8 words about his wife and daughter dying from heat being less paperwork? I searched every memory for the moment he changed. I never found it. I spoke out loud to the empty office, to the Houston skyline, to nobody. When did you become this person? No answer came. Just the hum of the building's AC system, the industry I'd spent 30 years building, the comfort I'd brought to millions of homes, the thing my son had weaponized against his own daughter. I finished the bourbon, set the glass on my desk, stood up, turned off the office light, stood in the darkness looking down at Houston sleeping under heat advisory warnings. Tomorrow at 9 a.m., a crew of 8 technicians would arrive at Memorial Drive with trucks and power tools. Tomorrow at 9 a.m., Darren would discover that the house he thought was his had never been his at all. Tomorrow at 9 a.m., the locks would change, and tonight, for the first and last time, I had allowed myself to remember when my son was 7 years old and still knew how to read a blueprint without lying about what it said. I left the office, drove home, set my alarm for 6 a.m. Morning comes whether you're ready or not. And at 9 o'clock Thursday, exactly 72 hours after I'd signed the notice to vacate, the repossession would begin. The alarm went off at 6 a.m. Thursday. I'd slept 4 hours, enough. I showered, dressed in a suit, made coffee. At 7:30, my phone buzzed with a text from Richard Tanner. They left at 7 a.m. for Hobby Airport. Flight to Vegas. They think the cards will work when they land. Perfect. At 9 o'clock Thursday morning, exactly 72 hours after the notice to vacate was served precisely to the minute, I turned the Trustmaster key in the Memorial Drive estate front door. For what I knew would be the final time, and behind me on the driveway, 8 Ashford Climate Systems technicians waited beside 3 empty trucks to dismantle a life my son had never actually owned. I'd brought my own crew, men I'd worked with for 20 years. Men who knew how to move fast, move clean, and not ask questions. Eugene stood beside me on the front porch, holding the Appendix B inventory list, the detailed asset schedule Darren had signed without reading when he'd moved into the house. Every piece of furniture, every appliance, every vehicle registered to the Ashford Family Revocable Living Trust. Personal items go in boxes on the porch. I said to the crew. Clothes, toiletries, photographs, everything else listed in Appendix B gets loaded. They nodded and went to work. I walked through the house one more time. The central AC was running at 65 degrees, cool, efficient, perfect. The 85-inch television in the living room was still mounted to the wall. The $4,000 espresso machine sat gleaming on the granite countertop. The leather sofa set looked like it had never been sat on. All of it purchased with trust funds. All of it listed in Appendix B. All of it going back into storage. By 10 a.m., the living room was empty. By 11, the kitchen was stripped. By noon, the bedroom furniture was loaded into the second truck. The crew worked with mechanical precision. Box, load. Next. I stood in the empty living room at 12:15 and looked around. White walls, empty floors. This is what it had looked like the day I'd bought it 28 years ago. Before Darren moved in. Before he'd filled it with things he thought were his. Before he'd turned off the air conditioning and nearly killed his daughter. I stood in the empty living room one last time. The central AC was humming at full capacity, 65 degrees, the way I'd always kept it. I walked to the thermostat and turned it to 85 degrees. If he wanted cold air tonight, he was going to have to find it somewhere else. The locksmith finished installing the new locks at 12:30. Industrial-grade mechanical deadbolts. No smart locks, no codes, just keys. 2 copies, one for me, one for Eugene. I taped the legal notice to the front door. Property secured per notice to vacate. Contact Eugene and Lancaster, attorney at law for personal belongings retrieval. Then I locked the door, got in my GMC, and drove away. Behind me, 20 white storage boxes sat on the front porch in the July heat. Everything Darren actually owned. Everything that was truly his. It fit in 20 boxes. 400 miles west at 2:30 p.m. Las Vegas time, Darren and Saskia walked into the Bellagio Hotel. I wasn't there to see it. But Richard Tanner was. He'd caught the same flight they did 3 rows back, and now he stood in the lobby pretending to check his phone while watching everything unfold. He sent me a video 30 minutes later. Marble floors, crystal chandeliers, Saskia wearing designer sunglasses and a large hat like she was arriving as royalty. Darren in his linen vest, rolling a Rimowa suitcase, walking up to the front desk with the confidence of a man who'd never been told no. He set the luggage down, pulled out his leather wallet, placed an Amex Platinum card on the counter. "Presidential suite under Ashford," he said to the receptionist. "Charge everything this weekend to this card. It has no limit." The receptionist smiled, swiped the card. Declined. Sharp beep, red screen. Darren blinked. "Try again," he said. "Your machine isn't working." She swiped again. Declined. Beep. Darren's smile faded. "Let me try a different card," he said. "Secondary Visa. The backup card." Swipe. Declined. Beep. Debit card. Swipe. Declined. Beep. Personal card opened in 2020, the one he'd had before I'd given him access to anything. Swipe. Insufficient funds. Negative $340. Declined. 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 5 cards. 5 consecutive terminal beeps. 5 red screens. $0 remaining. The receptionist's smile had disappeared. "Sir, do you have another form of payment?" Darren stood there staring at the counter where 5 credit cards lay spread across marble like evidence at a crime scene. "There must be a mistake," he said. His voice had changed, higher, uncertain. "These cards have 50,000 in available credit. There's a mistake." "I'm sorry, sir," the receptionist said. "The system is showing all cards declined." Darren turned to look at Saskia. She was standing 3 feet behind him, watching, silent. And as I watched the video, I saw the exact moment it happened. Saskia took one small step backward, not turning away, not leaving, just one deliberate step, creating exactly 18 inches of visible distance between herself and the man whose money had just run out. The receptionist was saying something about the reservation being canceled, about needing to clear the desk for other guests, about hotel security if necessary. Darren gathered his 5 declined cards with shaking hands. Saskia took her phone out of her purse, started typing, not looking at Darren, not offering to help, just typing a message to someone who wasn't him. Richard's video ended there. I sat in my car outside the empty Memorial Drive estate watching the sun start its descent over Houston. 400 miles away, my son was standing in the Bellagio lobby with 5 maxed-out credit cards and a woman who'd already started planning her exit. I'd given him everything: a house, a business, a family, a future, And he'd traded it all for a woman who was now standing 18 inches away from him, texting someone else, waiting for the right moment to disappear. My phone sat on the dashboard. I knew the call would come soon. Desperation has a predictable timeline. Before I tell you what happened next, are you still with me right now? Comment A. If you think Saskia will leave before Thursday 9 a.m. or B. If you think she'll stay and try to take something valuable first, and add one short reason so I can see how you're reading this. A quick note: what follows includes some recreated details for narrative depth. But the lesson behind the pattern is what matters. The call never came Thursday night or Friday morning. Richard Tanner sent updates instead. Budget flight booked for Friday. Arrived Houston 6 a.m. Uber ordered to Memorial Drive. I parked my Mercedes 2 houses down from the estate at 7:30 Friday morning and waited. I watched the silver Uber pull through the gates at 8 a.m. sharp, exactly as Eugene said it would. Darren and Saskia stepped out onto the driveway, carrying shopping bags from Vegas Caesar's Palace logo Forum. Shop's logo bags they'd filled before the cards stopped working. They walked up the driveway toward the front door, and I could see the exact moment Darren noticed something was wrong. The white storage boxes, 20 of them stacked on the front lawn like oversized dice, each one labeled in Eugene's precise handwriting. Bedroom, office, garage, personal effects. Darren stopped walking, set down his shopping bags, stared. Saskia kept walking toward the front door, spotted the envelope taped to the wood, pulled it off, read it. "Those are storage boxes," she said, her voice carrying across the quiet morning street. "Lawrence, those are our things in storage boxes on the lawn like we're—" She didn't finish the sentence. Darren walked to the front door, pulled out his phone, entered the door code on the smart lock. Rejected. Tried again. Rejected. "The code's not working," he said. "Saskia, the goddamn code's not working." He tried 3 more times. The lock beeped rejection each time. Saskia pulled out her phone, started pacing near the storage boxes, made a call. Not to Darren, she was standing right next to him, to someone else. I watched her body language, listened to the cadence of her voice even though I couldn't hear the words. She wasn't calling Darren's lawyer. She wasn't calling for help. She was calling her own lawyer, making her own plans, separating her interests from his. Darren walked around to the side of the house, tried the garage door code, rejected, tried the back door, locked. He came back to the front, pulled out his phone and called someone. Probably me. I felt my phone buzz in my pocket. Let it go to voicemail. The Houston heat had already climbed to 92 degrees by 8:15 a.m. Through the Mercedes windshield, I watched heat waves shimmer off the white storage boxes stacked on my lawn, each box labeled in Eugene's precise handwriting. 32 years of building something to pass on, reduced to 20 containers on St. Augustine grass I'd paid to install myself. Darren was standing in the driveway now, phone to his ear, leaving a message. His face was red. His voice was raised. I couldn't hear the words, but I could read the rage. Saskia had moved away from him, 15 feet of distance, still on her own phone, still making her own plans. I started the Mercedes engine, drove slowly up Memorial Drive. Darren spotted the car immediately, recognized it, started running toward the street. I pulled into the driveway and stopped 10 feet from where he was standing, kept the windows up, kept the AC running at 72 degrees. Darren ran to the driver's side window, started pounding on the glass with both fists. Ta-da. His voice was muffled through the glass, but I could hear the desperation. "Dad, open the door. What the hell is this? You can't just lock me out of my own house." I sat perfectly still, hands on the steering wheel, eyes forward. He pounded harder. "Open the goddamn door!" I lowered the window. Exactly 4 inches. Enough to speak through. Not enough for him to reach in. The air conditioning in my Mercedes pumped 72-degree air across my face while outside, Darren's shirt darkened with sweat stains across his chest and back. Saskia stood 15 feet away under the oak tree we'd planted when Darren turned 6, her phone camera pointed at us, recording her linen dress still crisp from the Bellagio's professional laundry service. Texas Property Code. Section 24.3, I said. My voice was calm, flat, legal. You have 10 days to remove belongings from storage. I'd like my mother's watch back now, please. Darren stared at me through the 4-inch gap. Your mother's watch. His voice went higher. Your mother's. You built this place for me. You said the company was mine. You're destroying your own son over some. He was still wearing it. The Rolex Submariner. My wife's watch. The one she'd left him with written instructions to wear on days that mattered. He'd worn it to a spa while his daughter nearly died. The watch, I said. Now. Here, Darren screamed. He pulled the watch off his wrist. Take your fucking watch. Take everything. You're destroying me. You're my father and you're destroying me. He threw the watch through the 4-inch gap. I caught it with my right hand, felt the weight of it, the metal still warm from his wrist, pressed it against my chest, over my heart, where my wife used to wear it before she got sick, where it belonged. Thank you, I said. Eugene Lancaster has your storage facility address. You'll receive the final accounting by certified mail within 48 hours. I raised the window, put the Mercedes in reverse. Darren was still screaming, pounding on the glass, but the window was up. The AC was running, and I was leaving. I backed out of the driveway, put the car in drive, started down Memorial Drive. In the rearview mirror, I watched Darren kick one of the storage boxes. It tumbled across the lawn. Clothes spilled out onto the grass. Saskia was still standing under the oak tree, still on her phone, not helping, not comforting, just watching, calculating, planning her own exit from a sinking ship. I drove 3 blocks, pulled over, stopped the car, looked down at the watch in my hand. My mother had given this to my wife on our wedding day. My wife had worn it every day for 38 years. She'd left it to Darren in her will with one instruction: wear this on days that truly matter. He'd worn it to a spa. I pressed the watch against my chest again. Felt the metal warm against my shirt. This wasn't just about getting the watch back. This was about reclaiming my mother's values. My wife's values. The things that actually mattered. I'd taken back the house, the money, the business. Now I'd taken back the watch. And tomorrow Darren would open those storage boxes and discover what else I'd left for him to find. I drove home with my mother's watch in the cup holder beside me, the metal still warm from Darren's wrist. Set it on my dresser next to Rebecca's jewelry box, where it had sat for 38 years before I'd given it to our son. Saturday morning at 6 a.m. day, D+5. Eugene's email arrived with a subject line I'd been waiting for creditor notifications delivered. I opened it. All 3 acceleration clauses triggered per your instruction. Total outstanding $127,400. Collection representatives dispatched to last known address. Your guarantee withdrawal letters filed with each institution Tuesday morning at 03:47 a.m. Legally, you bear no responsibility for this debt. It belongs entirely to your son. Tuesday morning at 3:47. The same moment I'd removed him from the bank accounts. The same moment I'd canceled his cards. The same moment I'd started the clock on everything. But the guarantee withdrawal that had happened earlier, 2 days before I'd come home from Chicago. 2 days before I'd found Rosie with blue fingertips. 2 days before I'd known what Darren had done. I'd pulled my guarantees based on instinct alone. Based on Valentina's silence. Based on stopped photos and 2 careful phone calls. I'd been right. Richard Tanner sent me an update at 10 a.m. that same day. Subject located at motel, North Houston. Budget chain. Debt collection representative on site. Conversation lasted 8 minutes. Subject attempted to reference your guarantee. Representative informed him, guarantee withdrawn in writing 48 hours prior to incident. Subject has no viable payment options. I sat in my office looking at that message. Darren had borrowed against my name, against my reputation, against 30 years of building Ashford climate systems into something that meant trust and reliability across Texas. He'd borrowed for Vegas trips, for spa weekends, for Saskia's designer clothes, and now those 3 lenders wanted their money back. $127,400 due immediately. No assets, no job, no credit, no father willing to bail him out. Revenge is supposed to feel like vindication, but watching your son's credit implode feels more like watching your own foundation crack from the inside out. 3 weeks passed. I went to work, checked on Valentina and Rosie at my house. They were settling in Rosie's color, fully normal now. Valentina interviewing for jobs, rebuilding. I didn't ask about Darren. She didn't mention him. I wore my mother's watch every day. Then, on a Tuesday morning in mid-August, my phone buzzed with a text from Richard Tanner. Subject located, Northwest Industrial Park. Roofing crew. You'll want to see this. He sent an address. I drove out there at 10 a.m., parked my GMC Denali in the far corner of the parking lot, set the AC to 65 degrees, pulled binoculars from the glove box. The warehouse roof was maybe 40 feet up. Flat. Black tar surface. No shade. The August sun beating down at full intensity. I could see them up there, 6 men in hard hats and safety vests, moving slowly in the heat, carrying equipment, installing ductwork for a commercial HVAC system. One of them was my son. He was thinner than he'd been 3 weeks ago. His vest was soaked through with sweat. His neck was sunburned red. He was pulling copper tubing across the roof, feeding it to another worker who was connecting it to the condensing unit. The founder of Ashford Climate Systems, watching his son install air conditioners under the sun that had nearly killed his wife and daughter. My SUV thermometer read 65 degrees inside. The dashboard display showed external temp 103 degrees. The roof surface would be hotter. 130, maybe more. The same temperature differential that had killed Rebecca. I watched him work. He moved like a laborer. Not like someone who'd grown up expecting to inherit a company. Not like someone who'd worn a Rolex to a spa. Just like a man who needed $18 an hour to survive. Nobody on that roof looked at him differently than any other worker. Nobody knew he was supposed to have owned all of this. The industry, the company, the legacy. He was just another laborer in a hard hat pulling copper tubing in 130-degree heat. I watched for 20 minutes. 20 minutes of my son doing the work I'd done 40 years ago when I was building this industry from nothing. Except I'd been building towards something. He was just trying to survive what he'd destroyed. That's all the watching I could stand. I put the binoculars down, started the engine. The AC kicked back to full power, pumping cold air across my face. This should have felt like justice, like karma, like the universe correcting itself. The man who'd turned off the AC to save money was now working in unbearable heat to earn it. The man who'd given his wife a $200 allowance was now pulling copper for $18 an hour. The man who'd typed 8 words about less paperwork was now doing manual labor for an industry his father had built. Perfect symmetry, perfect revenge, perfect justice, but all I felt was empty. I'd taken back the house, the money, the watch, the guarantees, everything. I'd stripped him down to nothing, reduced him to a laborer on a roof, made him feel the heat he'd forced on others. The revenge was complete, but Rebecca was still gone. Rosie had still suffered. Valentina had still been trapped in that house. Destroying my son didn't undo any of it. I backed out of the parking lot, drove toward downtown, Didn't look back at the warehouse roof. Somewhere up there, Darren was still pulling copper tubing, still sweating, still burning under the August sun. And somewhere in my chest, where I'd pressed my mother's watch after taking it back from him, I felt something that wasn't satisfaction. It was just the weight of absence. Rebecca was gone. That fact hadn't changed. Punishing Darren hadn't brought her back. Watching him suffer hadn't resurrected her. Making him work in the heat hadn't cooled the temperature the day she died. The revenge was complete. But I still had one more thing to take back. Not from Darren, from myself. I drove home from that warehouse roof knowing what I needed to take back from myself wasn't something Darren had stolen. It was something I'd been holding on to for 2 weeks, waiting for the right moment to let it go. That evening, Valentina sat across from me in the library, and I placed the single sheet of paper on the mahogany desk between us, like evidence at trial. "Eugene called this afternoon," I said. "He needs you to confirm you've read the complete message thread for the divorce petition." Valentina looked at the paper but didn't pick it up. "Oh, I read the iPad at the hospital," she said quietly. "I saw the messages to Saskia, the planning, the 6 months of lies." I know," I said, "but I kept one text back, I'm sorry." Her eyes moved to the paper. "Why?" she asked. "Because Eugene needed you to see the whole truth," I said. "Not my interpretation, not my summary, the actual words." I'd been waiting for this moment for 2 weeks. Since the hospital. Since the iPad. Since Eugene had told me that Valentina's sworn statement would need to reference the complete message thread to establish grounds for the divorce petition. I could have shown her immediately. Could have let her read it in the hospital room while Rosie slept beside her. But I'd waited, strategically, deliberately, until the moment when seeing it would serve the maximum legal purpose and give her the maximum emotional permission to act. Valentina picked up the paper. I watched her eyes move across the text, watched her hands start to shake, watched her face go from confused to comprehending to something that looked like being hit in the chest. She read it twice, then she set the paper down very carefully on the desk. If both of them died from the heat, it would save me the trouble. Less paperwork. Her voice was perfectly steady. "He wrote that about his mother and his daughter. About Rebecca and Rosie. Less paperwork." "Yes," I said. "When?" "That morning," I said. 9:07 a.m., 3 hours before I arrived. She picked up the paper again. Read it a third time. Like she needed to make absolutely certain the words said what she thought they said. Then she started crying. Not the quiet tears she'd cried in the hospital. Not the controlled grief she'd shown when reading the iPad. This was different. There's a specific sound grief makes when someone finally receives permission to feel it. Not the quiet tears of shock, but the deep, body-shaking sobs of someone who's been holding a dam closed with their bare hands for weeks. I stood up, walked to the small bar cart in the corner, made tea, the only thing I knew how to make that might help. Earl Grey. 2 sugars. The way Rebecca used to make it. I set the tea before her, like laying flowers at a grave, an inadequate gesture toward immeasurable loss, but the only ritual available to men who don't know how to comfort. Valentina cried for 5 minutes. I sat in silence. Didn't try to comfort her. Didn't tell her it would be okay. Just let her break. When she finally stopped, she wiped her face with her hands. Picked up the tea. Drank. "I want to sign the papers," she said. "Tonight." "They're already drafted," I said. "Eugene will be here at 9 a.m. tomorrow. I'll witness if you need me to." She looked at me. Really looked at me. And I saw her understand. "You knew," she said. "You knew this message would be the one that ended it." "Yes," I said. "How long have you had this?" "I took 2 weeks, since the hospital." "And you waited until Eugene needed it legally?" "Yes." She nodded slowly. "You could have shown me immediately. Let me make the decision on my own timeline." I could have. I said. But Eugene needed your sworn statement, and you needed to be absolutely certain, no doubt, no second guessing, no wondering if you'd read him wrong or if there was some explanation. There's no explanation for this, she said, touching the paper. You know, I said. There isn't. She drank more tea, set the cup down. The papers, she said. When were they actually drafted? 3 days ago, I said. Before Eugene called you this afternoon? Yes. So you already knew I'd sign when I read this. I met her eyes. Yes. She looked down at the paper again. At those 8 words. Less paperwork. You're right, she said quietly. I needed to see it. Not hear about it. Not have you tell me what it said. I needed to see exactly what he wrote about my daughter and your wife. I know, I said. She folded the paper with steady hands. Put it in her purse. Sat there for a moment in silence. When Rebecca died, she said Darren cried at the funeral. He gave a speech about how much he loved her, how she was the best mother anyone could ask for. I believed him. So did I said. And then he wrote 8 words that said loving her would have been less paperwork if she'd just died faster. I said nothing. There was nothing to say. Valentina stood up, picked up her purse, walked to the library door, stopped. Thank you, she said, for waiting until I was ready. Even though you decided when that would be. You're welcome, I said. She opened the door, paused again. There's one more thing I need to tell you about that weekend, she said. Something Darren said to Rosie in the hospital room before you arrived. I haven't told anyone. Not the doctors, not the police, not you. I waited. But now that I'm signing those papers tomorrow, she said, you should probably know what kind of man your son really is. What he said to his 7-month-old daughter while she was hooked up to monitors fighting for her life. She looked at me. Tomorrow, she said. After the papers are signed. After it's final. Then I'll tell you. She walked out of the library. I sat there alone looking at the empty teacup, at the space where the printout had been at the door she'd just walked through. Tomorrow at 9 a.m., Eugene would arrive with divorce papers. Valentina would sign them. The marriage would end. And then I'd learn what else my son had said. What else he'd done. What other cruelty I hadn't yet discovered. I stood up, turned off the library light, went upstairs, past Valentina's room, heard her crying again, didn't knock, didn't interrupt, just kept walking. Some grief you have to carry alone. And tomorrow we'd both sign papers that said we were done carrying Darren's weight. The next morning, Valentina and I drove to Eugene's office in silence. She sat in the passenger seat holding her purse where she'd placed the printout last night. Neither of us mentioned what she'd promised to tell me after the papers were signed. Eugene slid the divorce petition across his desk at exactly 9 a.m. The pages already flagged with yellow tabs marking where Valentina needed to sign. Grounds on. Eugene said, his voice professional and measured. Abandonment, financial abuse, child endangerment. All documented with supporting evidence. Valentina picked up the pen. Custody. Eugene continued. Sole custody to Valentina Carter Williams. No visitation rights pending court review. Valentina Carter Williams, I said. Not Ashford Tuhomp. I'm taking back my maiden name, Valentina said. And Rosie's legal name becomes Rosie Carter Williams, effective upon filing. I want nothing of his attached to my daughter. She signed the first page, then the second, then the third. Alimony, Eugene said. Certain none. Valentina said, not looking up from signing. I don't want his money. Not alimony, not anything beyond what Texas law requires for Rosie. I want nothing from him that I'd have to remember. Texas mandates minimum child support, Eugene said. 20% of net income for one child. Based on his current employment, $18 an hour, I said. Correct. Approximately $140 per week before taxes. The court will garnish wages directly. Valentina signed the alimony waiver. And Darren, she asked. Does he contest any of this? Eugene pulled up his email, turned the screen toward us. He signed the non-contested agreement by email at 6 this morning, Eugene said. No attorney, no objections, no requests for modification. It's done. I read the email timestamp. 6:03 a.m. Darren had signed away his marriage, his daughter, his visitation rights at 6 in the morning from whatever motel room he was renting with laborer wages. He'd had no resources left to fight, no money for lawyers, no leverage, no options. He'd just surrendered everything. Valentina signed the final page, set down the pen, folded her hands on the desk. When does it become official? She asked. I'll file this afternoon, Eugene said. Effective immediately upon filing. You'll have the decree in 3 business days. Watching your daughter-in-law erase your son's name from your granddaughter's birth certificate should feel like victory. But it just feels like watching the last branch cut from a family tree you spent 40 years growing. Valentina stood up, shook Eugene's hand, walked to the door, stopped, turned back to me. You wanted to know what Darren said to Rosie in the hospital, she said. Before you arrived, when she was hooked up to monitors and I was getting IV fluids, I waited. He came into the room at 2 p.m., she said, 6 hours after we'd been admitted. He looked at Rosie in the crib, looked at the monitors, looked at me, and he said, "This is going to cost a fortune. I hope you're happy." The office went very quiet. Not is she okay? Not what happened? Not I'm sorry, Valentina said. Just how much it was going to cost. Like she was a broken appliance instead of his daughter. She looked at me. "Sign, I knew then," she said. Before the iPad, before the messages, before any of it. I knew what kind of man I'd married. I just didn't have the courage to act on it until you showed me I could. She walked out. I sat in Eugene's office for another 10 minutes. Didn't speak. Just sat. Eugene waited. "Close the surveillance," I finally said. "Send Richard the final payment and tell him we're done." Understood, Eugene said. I left the office, drove to work, spent the day reviewing contracts and approving bids like it was any other Tuesday. 1 week later, my phone rang at 2 p.m. Darren. I stared at the screen for 3 rings. Answered on the 4th. "She's gone," he said. No greeting, no preamble. His voice was hollow. "She took everything. Who I asked, though I already knew. My Saskia, she's gone. She took everything." There's a specific kind of silence that follows a son calling his father for the first time in months. Not forgiveness, silence, or reconciliation. Silence, but the hollow quiet of a man realizing he's become the story he told about someone else. "What did she take?" I asked. "The watch," he said. "My watch. The Tag Heuer I bought with my first paycheck from the roofing job. $340 from my wallet. The keys to the Honda Civic. Everything. Not his mother's Rolex. He'd already thrown that away. This was the watch he'd bought himself. The one he'd earned. She left a note," I asked. "Should nothing," he said. I came back from work and she was just gone. Moved into Marcus's place. Richard Tanner told me he stopped. "You knew about Marcus." "Yes," I said. "You knew she was seeing him." "Yes." "You knew she'd leave." "Yes." Silence on the line. "When?" he asked. I knew when she took that step back at the Bellagio," I said. "When your cards declined and she moved 18 inches away from you. Saskia always had an exit. She just waited until the exit was cheaper." "Cheaper," he repeated. "You had money when she met you," I said. "You had a house, cars, credit cards. She stayed until those were gone, until there was nothing left worth taking. Then she left, like I did to Valentina, he said quietly. I didn't respond, didn't need to. He'd said it himself. Dad, he started. I have to go, I said. I hung up, set the phone on my desk, stared at Richard Tanner's final surveillance report in front of me. The last line read, "Subject has ceased all contact with known associates. Recommend closing case unless client requests extension." I picked up a red pen, wrote one word across the bottom, "Closed." The surveillance was over. The divorce was final. The house was empty. The revenge was complete. Darren had lost everything exactly the way he'd planned for Valentina to lose everything. The circle was closed, and I felt nothing but the weight of what it had cost to close it. I filed Richard Tanner's final report in the cabinet behind my desk, closed the drawer, locked it. The surveillance was over. The revenge was complete. And all I felt was the weight of what it had cost. The quarterly maintenance invoice arrived in October, with 17 pages of routine HVAC service documentation that I nearly signed without reading. Nearly. But 30 years of running Ashford Climate Systems had trained me to check every line item, every cost, every detail. So I flipped through the pages even though I knew what they'd say. Headquarters building, quarterly preventive maintenance, compressor inspection, ductwork cleaning, filter replacement, standard procedure, until I reached page 17, the technician roster. 6 names listed with their hourly rates and hours worked. Line 3. R. Williams Technician Level 1, $18 per hour. I stared at that line for a full minute. R. Williams. Not Darren Ashford, not D. Ashford. R. Williams. He'd changed his surname. Dropped Ashford entirely. Taken Williams, the same surname Valentina and Rosie now used as part of Carter Williams. Maybe he was trying to match them. Maybe he was trying to distance himself from the legacy he'd destroyed. Maybe he just wanted to be anonymous on a roster of HVAC technicians crawling through commercial buildings. The man who'd turned off the breakers to save money was now crawling through the ceiling of the building he was supposed to inherit, earning $18 an hour to service the air conditioning systems I'd built. I could have called the subcontractor, could have requested a different technician for future service calls, could have made sure R. Williams never set foot in Ashford Climate Systems headquarters again, but that would have been mercy, and mercy wasn't part of the accounting. I signed the approval form, filed it with the others. Valentina didn't need to know that 3 floors below the Ashford Family Foundation office where she now worked, her ex-husband sometimes serviced the HVAC system. When does revenge stop feeling like justice and start feeling like just another form of loss, watching your son's name reduced to a line item on a service invoice for a company that should have been his inheritance? Valentina had started at the foundation in September. Part-time at first, working mornings while Rosie was in daycare, learning grant administration and nonprofit finance. She'd been hesitant at first, uncertain if she was qualified, worried about being Charity from her ex-husband's father. But she wasn't Charity. She was thorough, detail-oriented, careful. By November, by Thanksgiving week, she was handling 3 independent grant applications without supervision. I walked past her office one afternoon and heard her on the phone with an applicant. "This application needs 3 more citations before submission," she was saying. "The environmental impact study from 2021, not 2020. Details matter when you're asking people to trust you with their money." I stopped in the doorway. She looked up, smiled. "Sure, Rebecca used to say the same thing," I said. She read every page of every contract I ever signed for the first 10 years. "Did she stop after 10 years?" Valentina asked. "No," I said. "She read them until the year before she died. Said someone had to make sure I didn't get too confident and miss the fine print." Valentina nodded. Went back to her phone call, but I saw her smile widen slightly. She read every page, unlike Darren. Unlike the son who'd signed an occupancy agreement without reading paragraph 7. Unlike the man who'd thought confidence could replace diligence, Thanksgiving arrived with cool November air and the first break from Houston's endless summer heat. Rosie was 11 months old now, walking while holding on to furniture, babbling words that almost made sense. Her color was perfect pink and healthy, no trace of the blue fingertips from July. I set up the dining room table for 3, cooked a small turkey, made mashed potatoes and green beans because that's what Rebecca used to make. Valentina brought wine, set Rosie in the high chair. We sat down to eat. 3 people. No tension. No walking on eggshells. No wondering when someone would explode or disappear or turn off the air conditioning. Just 3 people having Thanksgiving dinner. Rosie's laughter pure and unself-conscious, in a way 11-month-olds laugh before the world teaches them caution, sounded exactly like Rebecca's laugh from 40 years ago. And for the first time since July, I felt something other than absence. To Rosie's first Thanksgiving where nobody's yelling, Valentina said, raising her wine glass. And to second chances we didn't know we'd need. I raised my glass. We toasted. Rosie grabbed a handful of mashed potato from her plate and threw it. Hit me square in the forehead. Valentina gasped, started to apologize. Then Rosie giggled. That pure, unself-conscious baby laugh. And I laughed too. Valentina stared at me for a second. Then she started laughing. Really laughing. The first genuine laughter I'd heard from her since the wedding 3 years ago. We sat there laughing while Rosie clapped her potato-covered hands together, delighted that she'd made the adults react. This was a family. Not the family I'd planned. Not the family I'd built. Not the family I'd imagined when Darren was 7 years old learning to read blueprints. But it was a family founded on shared loss and mutual respect, and the understanding that sometimes the people you're supposed to save are the ones who end up saving you. Rebecca would have loved this, would have loved Valentina's thoroughness, would have loved Rosie's giggle, would have loved the quiet peace of a Thanksgiving dinner where nobody was performing or pretending or calculating how much it cost. Darren's absence wasn't a wound anymore. It was the foundation, the empty space that allowed the rest of us to breathe. That night, after Valentina and Rosie had gone upstairs after I'd cleaned the dishes and put away the leftovers, I stood in Rebecca's closet for the first time since the funeral. Her clothes still hung in the same order. Her jewelry box still sat on the dresser. Everything exactly as she'd left it. I opened the top drawer, pulled out the envelope she'd left me. The one her lawyer had given me at the reading of the will with specific instructions, don't open this until you're ready to forgive. I held it in my hands, looked at my name written in Rebecca's careful handwriting, and wondered if I was ready. I didn't open Rebecca's letter that night, or the next week, or the week after that. I kept it in my desk drawer and told myself I'd open it when I was ready, when I knew what forgiveness meant, when the revenge had settled into something I could live with. December arrived with cool air and the first real relief from Houston's heat in 6 months. The gate camera alert chimed on a Saturday afternoon while Valentina was reading to Rosie in the nursery. I looked at the monitor, saw a man standing at the gate, thin, wearing a faded flannel shirt, hair turning gray at the temples. Darren. I walked outside alone. Didn't tell Valentina. Didn't want her to have to make a decision about whether to see him or hide or pretend he didn't exist. He looked different. Not just thinner, older, like 5 months of manual labor had aged him 5 years. "Dad," he said through the gate. His voice was quiet, careful. "I'm not here to ask for anything. Can we talk just for a minute?" I stood on my side of the gate, waited. "Yeah, they diagnosed it last week," he said. "Arrhythmia, heart condition. From 5 months on roofs in that heat. The stress, He stopped. "The doctor said if I keep doing manual labor in extreme temperatures, it could get worse. A lot worse. The same medical vulnerability he'd created for Rebecca, for Rosie. The same risk of collapse, of organ stress, of a body unable to regulate itself under pressure. Karma doesn't always announce itself. Sometimes it just shows up wearing a faded flannel shirt and a heart condition. "No, I'm not asking for money," he said quickly. "I know I have no right. I just want to see her once. Rosie, just to look at her. 1 minute. That's all." "You're asking to see the daughter you left in 100-degree heat while you spent her medical fund in Vegas," I said. "I know what I did," he said. His voice cracked slightly. "I know what I am. I'm just asking for 1 minute. Please." I looked at him through the bars of the gate. This man who was my son. This stranger who'd typed 8 words about less paperwork. This person I'd spent 5 months systematically destroying. And I felt nothing. No anger, no satisfaction, no vindication. Just the absence where a son used to be. "Wait here," I said. I walked back inside, found Rosie in the nursery with Valentina, 12 months old now, walking, talking in small sentences, wearing a red sweater and holding a cracker. "Come with Grandpa for a minute, sweetheart," I said. Valentina looked up, read something in my face, nodded. I carried Rosie outside to the gate. Darren saw her, and his eyes filled immediately. Red. Wet. The first genuine emotion I'd seen from him in years. Rosie looked at him. At this stranger standing outside the gate. Pointed with her cracker-holding hand. Grandpa," she said in her clear toddler voice. "Who is that man?" 4 words from a 12-month-old can erase 40 years of fatherhood. Who is that man? Darren grabbed the gate bars. His knuckles went white. "Rosie," he whispered. "Baby, I'm your..." But Rosie just looked at him. No recognition. No reaching. No crying for daddy. Just curiosity about a stranger. "Someone who made a choice, sweetheart," I said to her. A long time ago, I turned and carried Rosie back inside. Closed the door. Didn't look back. Behind me through the closed door, I heard nothing. No knocking, no shouting, no pleading. Just silence. That evening, I sat on the back porch for the first time without air conditioning running inside the house. December had brought 62 degrees, cool enough to sit outside, comfortably cool enough that the central AC I'd installed 7 years ago could finally rest. I poured bourbon. Sat in the wooden chair Rebecca and I had bought 20 years ago. Listened. The hum of 1,000 neighborhood air conditioners drifted across December's cool evening like a lullaby I'd been singing for 30 years, finally realizing I'd never needed to hear it in my own home. I'd built an empire on cooling Houston, on making the unbearable bearable, on engineering comfort in a city that routinely hit triple digits from May through October, and it had cost me everything. Rebecca had died in July heat while I was in Chicago. Rosie had nearly died in the same heat because my son had learned to value money over people. Darren had destroyed himself trying to inherit something that was never really his, all of it connected to air conditioning, to the business I'd built, to the legacy I'd thought I was creating. I took a sip of bourbon, looked up at the December sky, clear, cool, perfect, spoke out loud to the evening air. "The day you let your wife and daughter suffer in the heat to save money for yourself," I said, "that was the day you stopped being a father, a husband, and my son." The neighborhood AC units hummed their response. Familiar, constant. The sound I'd helped bring to millions of Texas homes. "I didn't take anything from you, Darren," I said. "You gave it all away." Inside the house, I could hear Valentina putting Rosie to bed. Probably reading the same story about the 3 bears that Rebecca used to read to Darren 40 years ago. Gate closed. Valentina and Rosie safe inside. The revenge complete. The surveillance file locked away. The divorce finalized. The house reclaimed. The watch returned. All of it done. All of it over. I set down the bourbon and went inside up the stairs to what used to be our bedroom and opened the drawer where I'd kept Rebecca's envelope since the reading of the will. Sat on the edge of the bed and finally broke the seal. Her handwriting filled a single page. No long speech. Just the words she must have known I'd need someday. You built a business out of making unbearable things bearable. Don't let what he does to this family become the one thing you can't cool down. Forgive him before you need his forgiveness back. Love him anyway. That's the only inheritance that matters. I read it twice, folded it back along its worn crease, set it on the nightstand where I'd see it every morning. I wasn't ready to call Darren. Not yet. But I was ready to stop pretending I never would. I went back downstairs, back out to the porch, and sat again in the wooden chair Rebecca and I had bought 20 years ago. And for the first time in my life, sitting on my back porch in natural December cool, I understood what Rebecca had meant when she'd said some kinds of warmth you can't engineer. The warmth of Rosie's giggle at Thanksgiving. The warmth of Valentina's genuine laugh. The warmth of a family built on honesty instead of inheritance. That warmth had nothing to do with HVAC systems or compressors or ductwork or the empire I'd spent 30 years building. I finished the bourbon, set the glass on the porch rail beside Rebecca's watch. The watch I wore every day, now the one I'd taken back from the son who'd worn it to a spa. The AC units hummed their familiar chorus across Houston's neighborhoods, and I sat in the cool December air, finally understanding that the most important thing I'd ever built wasn't a company. It was the choice to stop building and start protecting what mattered. And to you listening to my story, remember this family justice isn't about winning. It's about protecting the ones who can't protect themselves. Looking back, I never imagined I'd become one of those dad's revenge stories you hear about. I was just a grandfather who saw his granddaughter suffering and couldn't turn away. My mistake wasn't acting, it was waiting so long to see what was right in front of me. Don't make that same mistake. Trust your instincts when something feels wrong, especially when children are involved. The lesson I learned is simple but powerful. Family justice means standing up even when it's your own blood you're standing against. Sometimes the hardest battles are fought at your own dinner table. Darren was my son and I loved him. But love doesn't mean enabling harm. I believe God put me through this trial to teach me that protecting the innocent matters more than keeping the peace. Real dad's revenge stories aren't about anger. They're about courage to do what's right when everyone else looks away. The Lord gave me the strength to choose Rosie over my pride, and I'd make that choice again. If my story resonated with you, I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. Have you ever had to make a hard choice for family justice? Share this video with someone who needs to hear it. And if you haven't already, subscribe to Wise Revenge for more true stories about standing up when it matters most. Thank you for staying until the very end. Your time means everything to me. Remember, while the emotions in these dad's revenge stories are real, specific names and details have been changed. God bless you all.